Imagine walking into a house where nothing is disturbed, food still on the table, beds made, children's toys scattered on the floor, but everyone is gone, not kidnapped, not murdered, just gone. This happened in rural Alabama in 1909. 37 people, an entire family, vanished overnight. But when investigators searched the property, they found something that made them seal the case immediately and bury all records. On the wall of the main house was a family tree. But it wasn't like any family tree you've ever seen. The branches didn't spread outward. They curved backward, connecting to themselves, forming a closed loop. A genetic Ouroboros, a snake eating its own tail. And at the bottom, written in perfect handwriting, were the words, "We were born old. We died young. We were the echo of a bloodline that circled back on itself until we ceased to exist." Signed by an 8-year-old girl. Tonight, we're breaking the seal. We're telling the story the government didn't want you to know. Because this isn't just about one family in Alabama. This is about what happens when the circle closes. In the winter of 1909, a young doctor arrived in rural Alabama, fresh from medical school in Montgomery. His name was Dr. Henry Whitmore, and he'd been assigned to serve the remote communities deep in the backwoods, places where roads didn't reach, and where families lived by rules the outside world had long forgotten. He thought he'd seen everything during his training. He was wrong. What Dr. Whitmore discovered in those woods would haunt him for the rest of his life. A family, a bloodline, a circle that should never have been closed. This is the story of the Goler family. Though that wasn't their real name, the records were sealed, the graves were unmarked, and for over a century, this secret has been buried in the red clay soil of Alabama. But tonight, we're digging it up. This isn't just a story about genetics gone wrong. This is about isolation, about what happens when a family turns inward for so long that they become something else entirely, something unnatural. And at the center of it all was a family tree that didn't branch, it looped back on itself, forming a perfect, terrible circle. Dr. Whitmore's journal, discovered in 1987 in an estate sale, tells us everything. The entries start normal enough, treating pneumonia, delivering babies, setting broken bones. But then, on February 14, 1909, everything changed. He wrote, "I was summoned to a homestead 15 miles north of the settlement. The messenger, a boy of perhaps 12, had eyes that seemed ancient. He didn't speak much, just said his mama needed help with the birthing. The ride took 3 hours through dense forest. The trees grew so thick that daylight barely penetrated. When they finally arrived, Whitmore saw what he described as a collection of structures more than a proper homestead. 7 buildings arranged in a circle around a central well. That detail matters, remember it. There were people everywhere, but something was off. Whitmore counted at least 30 individuals, but he couldn't determine who belonged to which generation. An elderly woman sat beside a child who looked nearly the same age. A man who appeared to be in his 60s claimed to be the father of a woman who looked 70. But it was the birth that truly terrified him. The mother, Sarah, appeared to be no more than 19 or 20. But when the baby emerged, a boy, Whitmore noted something that made his blood run cold. Infant had wrinkles, not the normal creases of a newborn, but deep lines around the eyes and mouth. The baby's skin had a texture that reminded him of parchment paper. And when the child opened his eyes, they weren't the cloudy blue of most newborns. They were yellow. Jaundiced, certainly, but there was something else, something knowing. Whitmore wrote, "The child appeared to have been born old. I have no other way to describe it." While the body was that of an infant, the face carried the weight of years it had not lived. Over the next 3 weeks, Dr. Whitmore made 7 more visits to that homestead. He couldn't stay away. Medical curiosity, perhaps, but his journal suggests something deeper, a horrified fascination, like watching a wound fester, but being unable to look away. He began documenting the family structure, and what he found defied everything he understood about bloodlines. The patriarch, they called him Old Thomas, though he was probably only 50, had married his daughter when she was 16. That daughter, Martha, had borne him 6 children. 3 of those children had married each other. The next generation married their cousins, their aunts, their uncles. The generation after that, the lines became so tangled that Whitmore couldn't trace them anymore. He drew it out on paper. A family tree that started normally enough, with 2 parents at the top. But as the branches descended, they began curving back, connecting to previous generations. By the 4th generation, the tree formed a complete circle. Every child was born from blood that had mixed and remixed so many times that their DNA had become a closed loop, a genetic echo chamber where the same broken pieces kept bouncing back, amplifying every defect, every mutation, every hidden flaw. The effects were devastating. Of the 37 individuals Whitmore documented, only 12 appeared physically normal. The rest displayed what we now recognize as severe inbreeding depression, cleft palates, shortened limbs, microcephaly, abnormally small heads, mental disabilities ranging from mild to profound, and that strange, premature aging he'd first noticed in the newborn. One girl, age 6, had gray hair and cataracts. A boy of 14 had the bent spine and liver spots of a man in his 70s. The elderly woman Whitmore had seen on his first visit. She was 32 years old. But here's what truly terrified him. They didn't think anything was wrong. Whitmore made inquiries in the nearest town, a place called Millbrook, about 20 miles from the homestead. The responses he got ranged from uncomfortable silence to outright hostility. One shopkeeper told him, "Don't go poking around there, Doc. Those folks been keeping to themselves since before the war." He meant the Civil War. That was 44 years earlier. A preacher, Reverend William Stakes, was more forthcoming. Over whiskey in the Reverend's study, he told Whitmore the story. The family had arrived in Alabama sometime in 1840s, 2 brothers and their wives, fleeing something in North Carolina. No one knew what. They'd bought a large tract of land in the most remote area available and built their compound. For the first decade, they were normal enough. They traded in town, attended church occasionally, kept themselves but weren't hostile. Then, around 1855, they stopped coming to town entirely. When people rode out to check on them, they were turned away at gunpoint. The few travelers who stumbled onto their land by accident reported strange things. Children who looked wrong, structures arranged in odd patterns, sounds in the night that didn't match any animal they knew. By 1870, a full generation had passed with 0 outside contact. The community decided that if the family wanted to be left alone, so be it. Out of sight, out of mind, but rumors persisted. Stories of screaming in the woods, of babies born dead, or worse, born wrong and left in the forest, of travelers who ventured too close and were never seen again. Reverend Stakes leaned forward and told Whitmore something that made him consider abandoning his investigation entirely. 5 years back, a federal land surveyor came through. He didn't know about the family. Walked right into their territory while mapping the county. 3 days later, his body was found 2 miles away. Official report said he fell and hit his head on a rock. But Doc, his body was covered in small handprints, children's handprints, and his pockets had been turned out. Nothing stolen, just searched. Like they were curious about what an outsider carried. No charges were filed. No investigation was opened. The family remained untouched. Against all advice, Dr. Whitmore returned to the homestead. This time he came with a specific purpose: to examine the children more thoroughly and, if possible, to understand the aging phenomenon. What he discovered was worse than premature aging. The children weren't just being born with elderly features. They were experiencing something called progeria, a genetic condition that causes rapid aging. But this wasn't the standard form of the disease. This was something new, something created by the family's unique genetic circumstances. Whitmore examined a girl named Eliza, age 8. She had the physical appearance of a woman in her 50s, gray hair, wrinkled skin, arthritis in her small hands. But it was her mind that shocked him. She spoke with the vocabulary of a well-educated adult. She understood concepts no 8 year-old should grasp. When Whitmore tested her knowledge, she could discuss philosophy, mathematics, even medical theory. It was as if the genetic compression that aged her body had also compressed her mental development, forcing years of learning and experience into a child's time frame. But there was a cost. Eliza told him in a voice that sounded like dried leaves rustling. "We know we're different, Doctor. We know we're wrong. That's why we stay here. That's why we don't leave. We're afraid of what's out there, but we're more afraid of what we are." Whitmore asked her about the family structure, about why they married their own relatives. Her answer chilled him. "We're not allowed to bring outsiders in. Grandfather says outside blood would break the circle, and if the circle breaks..." She paused, her ancient eyes meeting his. "He says we'll disappear, that we only exist because of the circle, that we're not real people anymore, we're echoes. And echoes need something to bounce off of." Whitmore didn't understand, not then. He examined more children. Each one showed the same pattern: advanced aging, accelerated mental development, and a deep existential awareness of their own abnormality. They weren't innocent children. They were old souls trapped in bodies that were simultaneously too young and too old. One boy, aged 10 but appearing 60, grabbed Whitmore's hand with surprising strength. "You want to help us," the boy said, "but you can't. The circle is already closed. We're inside it, and you're outside. The only way to break it is from the inside, and none of us are strong enough. We're born old, Doctor, and we die young. That's our curse." On Whitmore's 8th visit, old Thomas finally agreed to speak with him privately. They sat in what Thomas called the center house, the largest structure, positioned at the exact center of the circular compound. The interior was sparse but organized. Everything had its place. On one wall hung a massive hand-drawn family tree, the same circular pattern Whitmore had documented, but going back 6 generations. Thomas poured them both corn liquor and began to talk. "My grandfather started this," he said, "back in Carolina before we came here. He had certain beliefs about purity, about keeping the bloodline clean. But it wasn't racism, Doctor. It was something else. Something older." Thomas explained that his grandfather had been involved with a religious sect, a group that believed in isolating themselves from the corrupted world. They thought that by keeping their blood pure, by never mixing with outsiders, they could create a perfect community, a chosen people. But perfection had a price. By the 3rd generation, we started noticing the problems. The children born weak, born wrong, born old. My grandfather was furious. He thought we'd done something to anger God. So he made the circle tighter. Insisted we marry closer. Brothers to sisters. Fathers to daughters. He thought if we compressed the bloodline even more, we'd squeeze out the impurities. Whitmore sat in stunned silence, but it got worse. Thomas continued. Each generation, the children came out older. Sicker, smarter but broken, and we couldn't stop. We'd gone too far. Any outside blood now would kill us. Our bodies can't handle it. We tried once 15 years ago. Brought in a woman from town. She married my nephew. The baby they had, it died in 3 days. Just withered up like a dead flower. Thomas took a long drink. His hands shook. "We're dying, Doctor, not fast, but certain. Each generation is smaller, weaker. The children are born knowing they're dying. They age so fast now that most don't live past 20, and the ones that do, they're so crippled by the genetics that they can barely function." Whitmore asked the question that had been burning in his mind. "Why don't you leave? Why don't you go to the cities separate, break the cycle?" Thomas looked at him with something between pity and contempt. "Because we're already dead, Doctor. We're ghosts pretending to be people. This circle," he gestured to the compound around them, "is our prison and our grave. We were born into it, and we'll die in it. And maybe that's justice." Doctor Whitmore made one last visit to the homestead in April 1909. He brought medicine, supplies, and a plan to convince at least some of the younger members to leave with him. to seek treatment in Montgomery, to break the cycle. But when he arrived, the compound was empty. Not abandoned, empty. The building stood intact. Personal belongings remained in place, but every single person was gone. Whitmore searched for 3 hours. He found no signs of struggle, no blood, no indication of where 37 people could have vanished to. The only thing he found was note pinned to the door of the center house, in neat, careful handwriting, the kind a schoolteacher might use. Someone had written, "The circle is complete. Thank you for bearing witness. Tell them we were here. Tell them we were real, even if we shouldn't have been." It was signed by Eliza, the 8-year-old girl with the 50-year-old face. Whitmore reported the disappearance to the county sheriff. A search was organized. For 2 weeks, dozens of men combed those woods. They found no bodies, no graves, no trace of where the family had gone. It was as if they'd simply ceased to exist. Dr. Henry Whitmore continued practicing medicine in Alabama for another 40 years, but he never spoke publicly about what he'd seen. His journal remained private until his death in 1949, and even then, it wasn't discovered for another 4 decades. The homestead was eventually reclaimed by the forest. By the 1920s, no trace remained except for 7 stone foundations arranged in a circle around an old well. Modern geneticists who have reviewed Whitmore's notes say the family couldn't have survived as long as they did. The level of inbreeding he described should have resulted in complete genetic collapse within 2 generations. Yet somehow, they persisted for 6. Some researchers theorize that the family developed unique genetic adaptations, mutations that allowed them to survive the inbreeding longer than should have been possible. But that doesn't explain the aging. That doesn't explain the disappearance. In 2003, archaeologists from Auburn University attempted to locate the old homestead. They used historical records, survey maps, and Whitmore's detailed descriptions. They searched the entire area. They found nothing, not even the stone foundations, but they did find something else, something that wasn't in any of the records. In a small clearing, arranged in a perfect circle, were 7 graves, modern graves marked with wooden crosses, fresh graves no more than a few years old, and carved into each cross was the same symbol, a circle with a line through it, the symbol for 0, for nothing, for the end. Who buried those graves, who died in them, we'll never know. But sometimes, locals in that part of Alabama still report strange things. Children's voices in the woods, speaking with old voices. Handprints on car windows that belong to hands too small and too wrinkled. Shadows that move in circular patterns. Maybe the family didn't disappear. Maybe they just finally became what they'd always been destined to be: echoes. Ghosts of a bloodline that circled back on itself so tightly that it collapsed into nothing. In the end, the family tree that was a circle became a 0. And zeros, as we know, mean nothing. Or do they? This is the story that Alabama doesn't want told. The secret buried in sealed records and unmarked graves. Dr. Whitmore tried to help them, but some circles can't be broken from the outside. If you're watching this, share it. Let people know this happened, because the most terrifying part isn't that it happened once. It's that it could happen again, anywhere, to anyone. When we isolate ourselves too much, when we turn inward instead of outward, we risk creating our own circles, our own loops of thought, behavior, and ultimately, decay. The Goler family became a warning, a genetic horror story, a reminder that some circles are meant to be broken. What circles are you trapped in?